Well, as I explained on Sunday, the idea is that Harry and I were going to tag team. I was going to take Sundays and he was going to take Wednesdays. He's not feeling well tonight, so I will be sure to give him a ration of grief over that, especially if he pulls this again. So you'll be stuck with me again tonight. We're going to start out in chapter 1 of the book that we're studying from. I understand a lot of people don't have a copy of the book yet. I'm not too sure who's vice president in charge of materials, but Harry might have ordered some more. I'm not sure. Don't have an update on that, but we'll try to get those in as soon as possible. With this week being holiday week, it may have been delayed. I don't think we have any more in the back. But that's okay, because we're going to put them up here. Yes, this is the same slide you saw Sunday, but we're not going to be covering necessarily the same material. I think you got the clicker, right? Or do I have it? Okay, you got it. It's up here? Oh, my bad. I'm still getting used to this. I've taught before. You wouldn't believe that, but I have, but not here. Okay, we're gonna figure this out eventually. So last class, which was Sunday, was an introduction to what we're going to be studying, and we touched on a few topics generally about studying the Old Testament. This is a schedule. Yes, I know it's an eye chart. It'll be posted so that we have an opportunity for you to know which chapters, or even if you don't have a book, you'll know which chapters of Genesis and Exodus we'll be studying. This week will be 1 through 5 in Genesis. So this is lesson 1. Last Sunday was an introduction. We're going to be going over the creation, the fall of man, and the events up to the flood. So, talked to Harry on text, and I asked him what his format was going to be, and he explained it to me, and then I said, no, I'm not going to do that. So we're going to do it a little bit differently. Harry's going to teach one way, and I'm going to do it a different way, and we'll meet in the middle. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to start going through the books. These questions are very simplistic. They're looking for words that are specifically in the King James, because the book was published in 1953. But you can put in the words from your translation if it doesn't make sense. And don't feel obligated to use these and thous and those type of things, because I certainly don't speak that way. So let's start out with one. We're going to progress through these. This is a discussion class. I want to talk about the things that are important, using this book as a guide for a discussion, not as an expectation of the accomplishment of actually filling in all of the blanks. So if you don't have a book, or if you can't quite figure out which word it is, that's okay. We're going to talk about it. All right. I said there was no test, even at the beginning of the page, as you put your name on it, and there's a grade here. So we won't be grading them. But as the test, pop quiz, how many have a book and studied it this week? Okay. How many studied with their spouse? With their kids? You cheated. Well, I was kind of thinking of the younger kids, but okay. As I went over Sunday, this is very simplistic. If you have kids all the way down to 4 or 5, you can use this book to study with them. So please encourage them to study with you. It's a good time together. It's a good way for parents to lead their children and to bring them up in the way they should go. So we're going to start out Genesis chapter 1, starting in verse 1. I thought it was interesting, so we're going to repeat it. The first 10 words in Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Time, the beginning. Force is God. Action, created. Space, heavens, matter, earth. In the beginning. Beginning of what? Beginning of everything. As I mentioned Sunday, I was converted at 19, and some of those things didn't make sense to me. Because I had questions in my mind, just like a lot of people have questions in their mind. They said, well, if God existed before the beginning, then what's the beginning? How does that work? Okay, maybe I'll give you, there's a God, and he made everything, but what was there before that? The only way I ever got my head wrapped around it was for me to clearly understand that time is a creation. God created time. He set the boundaries on it. He set the parameters for it. He made it irreversible. Despite how many movies you've seen or books you've read, you cannot go back in time. I'm sorry, you cannot. He designated a beginning, and he designated an end. And if you haven't quite picked up on that when you're studying through the scriptures, please pay attention to it. In the beginning was the beginning of time. God exists outside of time. It is his creation. The scriptures say that there will be a time where time will be no more. And that's when it starts getting a little confusing, because we have a hard time understanding what that means. How can time no longer exist? What does eternity mean? Okay, it's a little deep. Well, it's deep for me anyway. So when we talk about this with people that don't believe the way we believe, it's one of those things you can bring up and talk about. What happened before the beginning? Well, we don't know, but we know that when God created time, that's the beginning. Okay? When did God create the heavens and the earth? Well, at the beginning. Do we know approximately when that is? From looking at the genealogies, from looking at the generations, looking at New Testament and Old Testament records, do we have a ballpark idea how old the earth is, how old everything is? Is it billions of years? Is it millions of years? Is it hundreds of thousands of years? Nope. It's a new earth. God can create anything he wants to look as old as he wants it to look. If he wants the Grand Canyon to be created mature, like it took 1,000,000 years to get that way, then that's what he'll do, and that's what he did. The earth is somewhere, I've heard it say, somewhere between 6,500 and 9,500 years old. 10,000 is about the farthest I've ever heard anyone calculate the age of the earth. So depending upon how you understood that question, whether it means as far as a discussion word, well, he created it in the beginning, or whether you mean how old is the earth, I think that kind of takes care of both of them. Anybody else have any other things that they've heard from people who believe the scriptures like we do? Anybody concur with that? 6,500, 9,500, where you consider a generation to be 17 years or 33 years, it gets a lot more technical than I can handle. And that's about it. Question number 2. Oh, the second part of question number 1. What was the earth's condition on day 1, right? Which would be right after the creation. What was the What were things looking like? Okay. Without form and void. I don't know what that means. I don't think it's necessary that we know what it means. But as we see the creation progress, we see it begin to take shape and be separated from one thing to another thing as we go farther into it. What was made each day? What was the first thing that was made? Light? Day and night? Okay. Light came before day and night. We'll get to that in a minute. Okay, 2, the firmament. Does anybody have anything other than the word firmament? I'm not real sure exactly what firmament is either. Atmosphere? Okay. What about number 3? What was made on that day? Earth, seas, grass, herbs. Hello? Okay. Number 4 kind of deals with the heavens, right? Sun, moon, stars. Day 5, fish of the sea, birds of the air. No man yet. Day 6, things that breathe and have life on the earth, animals, insects, man, woman. And the 7th day is rest. You'll see the pattern of 7 and the 7th being rest repeated throughout the Bible. So pay attention to it. When God tells the nation of Israel how to rotate their crops, there's rest. When he tells them how to treat their slaves, there's rest. When he talks to them about how to use their animals, there's rest. Rest is not evil. Rest is a good thing. Is all things in moderation. What are God's first recorded spoken words? Let there be light. Did anybody write down the verses that they have next to the answers that they got? Don't really need to now because we're only going through the first few verses. But as we go a little bit faster through some of the rest of the text, you may want to write those down. You may want to pick that book up later on and know right where that verse is, where you got your answer. That one happens to be in Genesis 1, verse 3. Of what were the following made? Man. Made man out of dust. Out of the dust he made us. And he says, to the dust we will return. Woman. Was woman made from dust? Exactly how God did it, we're not sure, but it says that she was made from him, from one of his ribs. Animals. I got this one wrong when I first filled this out. What are animals made of? Yeah, made out of the ground. Okay, maybe that's dust, maybe it's not dust. It was interesting to me that it was a little bit different. Same way with birds. The first aprons. I'm not really sure. Most of the modern day translations talk about aprons, but effectively it was a covering for the hip area. What were those made out of? And what were the clothes that God made for man that were more appropriate? Made out of skin. We understand that to be animal skin. Number 5, I got wrong too. So let's see if we can figure that one out. Why was man driven from the Garden of Eden? Because they sinned? Okay. Right. You got it. God said, "I'm going to drive him out of the garden, lest he eat of the tree of life and live forever." If you were wanting a clear explanation to that, I can give you Harry's phone number. I will not even pretend to tell you how that works. This is a story that we know to be factual, and yet we don't have all the answers to all the details that we might be curious about. But nevertheless, man was driven from the Garden of Eden, never to return. And what kept him from returning? Cherubim with a flaming sword. I've heard stories and read, things that people have been looking for the entrance to the Garden of Eden for a long time. Don't believe they're ever going to find that. But even if they did, it probably would not be good. God said he doesn't want you in there. You're not going in. All right, number 6.
I got a question back on number 3.
Okay.
About God saying, "Let there be light." I guess what's your thought on what that light is? Because, we read later on that he made the sun and the moon, and in my head, that's the light that I see. And so, I guess what's your thought? Light, separate light from darkness? Could it be meaning like good and bad?
Well, we know from discussions about heaven that there is no night there. I'm hoping that's not just a verse of a song. I believe that there is scripture that tells us that there is no night. And the light there is the light of God. There is no need for sun and moon and heavens anymore because that light shines from God. So the best guess that I can give you is that when he said, "Let there be light," there was light. But exactly how that fit into the creation before the sun and the moon, I cannot tell you. And speculate said that the presence of the Spirit moved over the waters, that Jesus was the active element in creation. He's been referred to as the light. God is referred to as light. I don't have that answer. Maybe there is one, but I don't have it. Sorry. Okay. 6. What was God's first recorded question? This is a trick question, by the way. All right. Where are you? Is that because God didn't know where Adam was? I'm sure when Harry gets back, you can quiz him about manners of speech and types of understanding and rhetorical questions and things of that nature having to do with the grammar. But pretty much what it means is this is a conversational, "Where are you?" Because what were they doing? They were hiding. He knew they were hiding. He knew where they were. That wasn't the point. The point is they had not hidden from him before because they had no reason to. Now they're hiding.
They didn't have the light. They didn't have the light.
They had done wrong. What was the occupation of Cain? Farmer? Okay. Tiller of the ground. Farmer of some kind, or many kinds maybe. What about Abel? A shepherd. Tended animals. Question's not in here, but why do you expect that God was upset with Cain for not offering an appropriate sacrifice? He offered a portion of what he produced as his occupation. Why did God not find favor in that? We don't have it recorded where God laid out what he expected, but we know that God is not the author of confusion. If he asked the brothers for an appropriate sacrifice, he told them what was appropriate. And Cain just didn't do it. What question, number 8, what question did the first murderer ask? Am I my brother's keeper? Did God know what had happened? And yet he asked him, where's your brother? Enoch is noted for what two things? Walking with God and being taken. Clarity on that actually is not in Genesis. It's actually in Hebrews, where Enoch is mentioned as one of the heroes of faith. And it says that he was taken. He was no more because God took him. Sometimes we see that. We see things and stories and occurrences in the Old Testament that aren't given clarity from God's perspective until the New Testament. We have the advantage of being able to see page 2. Larry? Yeah, that's a deep discussion. Why did God give man free will when he wanted man to harness his energies and contain himself, control himself, and act the way God told him to act? Why did he give him the power to not do that? I don't know. I guess it's we use the term robot. You know, you don't want people to be robots. You want your children to love you, not because you told them to, but because you want their genuine affection from them. You want that from them because it's precious. It's no longer precious if they do only what a robot would do.
Paul, when he's talking to Marcel, he explains in Acts 17, he talks about how God created all of these things and did that in hope that we would reach out to him. He did all of this to get our attention in hope that we would respond, to acknowledge him, and love him for what he had done. He's desiring that we choose. He doesn't need any of the things. That's what Paul
Right.
says. He doesn't need any of the things that he gave us to do. He wants us to choose, and I think that's that emotional side of him that we have a part of. That's so quick to
Yeah, some people have asked how long were Adam and Eve in the garden before they sinned. The answer is we don't know. But it wasn't very long. It wasn't very long. We're going to cover that a little bit more in depth here in a minute. All right, who lived the longest? Everybody knows this answer, right? Methuselah. Okay. And how many years was that? 969. Okay. How much longer did he live than Adam? No, there won't be a test on that. Because I don't have them all memorized. But those are two of the main figures when we talk about how long somebody lived. That's a long time. So in the next one, which is very similar to this one, it says, while darkness prevailed, the blank moved across the face of the blank. Spirit of God. We would expect that to be the Holy Spirit if it's specific, because we know all of God was active in creation, but this Spirit seems to be the Holy Spirit. Over the face of the deep what? I don't know. Maybe that was before everything was formed. Maybe it's the deep of the waters. I don't have that answer, but we do know that the progression of the creation had logic and intent, but it also had everything to do with the power of God and how he can speak something into existence. We can probably, even if we had it completely explained to us, probably have some trouble understanding all of it. God decreed that every living thing should bring forth it's one of the most important concepts when you're discussing evolution with someone and when you're discussing how we got where we are. One of the fundamentals of evolution is to try to create an environment where something learns from its failure and progressively changes for the better over millions of years. Well, for most of us that read this book, we understand that it doesn't work like that. If you wanted a tiger, you don't and can't breed an elephant with an anteater. You know, it just doesn't work. You cannot beat this fundamental concept that everything creates life after its kind. Trees make trees, flowers make flowers, dogs make dogs, man makes man. It's been that way from the beginning. Hasn't changed. Can you breed Dalmatians and Great Danes? Yes, but they're both dogs. So you've got to make sure you're clear when you're talking to people that evolution is a fundamentally flawed concept, not just because God says it is, but because of what we know about animals.
I think that obviously the majority of the time that the discussion of evolution is brought up, whether it be scholars or educators or whatever, it's this concept that something came from nothing or that we evolved from apes and things like that. But I think, whether it be terminology or just maybe mindfulness of who we're talking to in the audience, there is some degrees of evolution
there are some changes. But you're right. The fundamental flaw is having something come from nothing. The second one is that, and most people, anybody who's gone to school for any type of engineering will understand the laws of thermodynamics. One of them is that everything runs towards chaos. It doesn't get better, it gets worse. If you leave a piece of steel out in the rain, it doesn't get shinier, it gets rusty. Things degrade. And so for evolutionists to say that you start out with swamp water and you wind up with man, it's fundamental laws of physics and thermodynamics, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't go that direction. It actually goes the other way.
I think you have to be careful with the word evolution because of what that means. I think it's more of an adaptation. I think that, of course, there's all kinds of things in nature that change over time, but it's more adapting to environmental changes, things of that nature. I think evolution is a word that you kind of almost got to run from because it means something in people's minds.
Right.
Or something completely makes an about-face change, where an adaptation is completely different.
You're right, adaptation is the right word. We see that man created beasts, and he created birds, and he created fish, and he created man. Those are all separate. They have always been separate. They're going to be separate. But we do know that there are some adaptations that have occurred. Definitely not the scientific guy behind that, but we can see the difference between the two. And you're right, we need to be careful how we use the terms so that we don't get them mixed up. Number 3. Which river is mentioned as the fourth river rising from Eden? Euphrates. Do we have the Euphrates today? Shouldn't you be able to just follow the Euphrates right into the Garden of Eden? Evidently not. All right, number 4. Referring to eating the forbidden fruit, I want to see if you got the same thing I did in this next blank. So-and-so said. Who said? God said. And then Eve said. Didn't she repeat what God said? Trick question. Thou shalt surely die. But the serpent said, you will not surely die. It's a little bit interesting in the text. She repeats back what God had said, but she adds something to it. She tells the serpent, we're not even supposed to touch it. You ever notice that when you're reading it? If God said that, it's not recorded. He may have. But I don't believe that that's what we have in front of us. I think she might have been exaggerating just a little bit. Nevertheless, eating it was not acceptable. Number 5. This is another fundamental teaching. Eve saw that the fruit was good for food, pleasant to the eyes, and to be desirable to make one wise. Lust of the eye, lust of the flesh, prideful. Those are the 3 types of sin. Those are repeated in the New Testament. Pretty much all sin falls into those 3 categories. God said to the serpent, I will put enmity between thee make sure I'm on the right page here, and whom? Woman, in between thy seed and her seed. Oh.
I like
tempts Jesus in the same way in Matthew 4, 1 through 11. Like, he starts off by tempting her knowledge. You know, he asks, has God indeed say, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And then she responds, and I think like her response is like, she is already died, right? You shall not eat, nor shall you touch unless you die. So he clearly knows that she knows what she can and cannot do. But then he tries to undermine God. It makes her question God. When he says, you will not surely die, for God knows that in that day that you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So he uses some truth mixed with a lie to make her question her beliefs. And then she ends up giving in. And I wrote that same thing, you know, lust of the flesh, love the eyes, and the pride of life. And so it all goes to the fact that, like, even if you know and you know how to apply it, you can still be undermined. And it's funny how the devil is the same way he was then as he is now. And just because you know or you're aware of the things that God says doesn't mean you're necessarily safe.
And deceit sometimes is even more powerful than a lie, because it mixes an element of truth in with that subject, so that if you're not grounded, you can be swayed. Good point. So who are we talking about here in chapter 3, verse 15? Enmity between thee, meaning Satan, and the woman, and between her seed and his seed. You know exactly who we're talking about here? Okay. We got the flashing light. I was worried that we wouldn't have enough material to cover. I should have known better. Okay. Let's move on. So the rest of the chapter, we're going through some things fairly quickly. We don't necessarily need to memorize who Lamech's wives were, but we do understand that Adam and Eve had two sons, and Cain slew Abel, and then Seth was born to replace which one? Abel. What happened to Cain? Still alive, right? He was exiled or banished, or however you want to look at that. And the Bible, for a while, progresses to show what happened to Cain and what nations came of him. Because while he was still alive, he was not with Adam and Eve. They had two sons, and now they have one, Seth. So does anybody have, since we only have a couple minutes left, does anybody have, through the rest of these true, false, yes, no's, any of these that are particularly interesting, or have a comment to go along with that? Some of them you found to be strange questions or something you hadn't read before? Well, now this is a discussion class. So I have go ahead.
You know that this is not that important or anything, but the serpent, when he was punished, he said, on your belly you shall go. Wonder what he looked like. That's not very nice.
Yeah, I wondered about that too. I don't have an answer for that. I would like to have an answer for a lot of my questions, like if one of the curses was that man would work tilling the ground, and the woman would have some, pain in childbirth, what was it going to be like, before that, as man started multiplying and became millions of people? I don't think they were all supposed to fit in the Garden of Eden. Might have been a little bit crowded in there. Well, we have run low on time. Have another minute. We're done. Okay, for next week. Study, read the materials, chapters 6 through 10. We'll try to get more books if we possibly can. Study with your kids, study with your grandkids, study with your parents. And I'll be seeing you Sunday morning. Thank you.